You know, I've always been a fan of horror movies. The suspense, the thrill, the chills down your spine. There's something about being scared out of your wits that's oddly exhilarating. But little did I know that one day I would find myself in a real-life horror story on the set of a film that was destined to be cursed. It all started when I landed a job as a production assistant on a low-budget horror movie. The set was located in an old, run-down mansion on the outskirts of town, and the atmosphere was just right for a creepy film. Creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and ancient furniture that looked like it had seen better days. It was the perfect setting for a haunted house flick. As soon as I set foot on the set, there was a strange vibe in the air. Call it intuition, but something about the place just didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way the crew hushed when I entered the room, or the whispers about strange occurrences on set. Regardless, I brushed it off as typical set nerves and got to work. The first few days went by without a hitch. We were filming scenes of suspense and terror, and the atmosphere was electric. But then, things started to get weird. Props would move on their own, lights flickered without explanation, and crew members reported hearing eerie voices when no one else was around. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was off about this place, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was genuinely haunted. It was as if the past residents of the house were still lingering, and they weren't too pleased about our intrusion. One evening, after a particularly grueling shoot, I was tasked with locking up the set. The rest of the crew had already left, and I was alone in that eerie mansion. The silence was oppressive, and I could hear the faint rustling of the wind outside. I locked the main door and began making my way to the exit, trying to ignore the unsettling sensation that I was being watched. That's when I heard it, a soft, mournful wail that sent shivers down my spine. It was a woman's voice, distant yet clear, and it seemed to be coming from the depths of the mansion. My heart pounded, and I had to muster all the courage I had to investigate. I ventured further into the mansion, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The voice grew louder, more desperate, and it led me to a locked door in the basement. It was old and heavy, but I managed to pry it open. The sight that met my eyes will haunt me forever. In the dim light of the basement, I saw a ghostly figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. She whispered something I couldn't quite make out, and her presence sent waves of dread through my body. I stumbled back, terror clawing at my throat. I knew then that this mansion was no ordinary movie set, and the ghostly woman was proof of the curse that had plagued the production. I tried to tell the director and the crew about what I'd seen, but they brushed it off as stress-induced hallucinations. No one wanted to entertain the idea of a real haunting, not when the success of the film was on the line. As the days went by, the strange occurrences on set escalated. Objects moved of their own accord, and the crew grew increasingly uneasy. There was a tangible fear in the air, and I couldn't help but think that we were playing with forces we didn't understand. One night, as we filmed the climactic scene of the movie, the unthinkable happened. The ghostly woman I'd encountered in the basement materialized on set. She stood there, her eyes filled with anguish, and her presence sent shockwaves of terror through the cast and crew. The director, a skeptical man to the core, couldn't deny what he was seeing. He ordered the cameras to keep rolling and the actors to react as if the ghostly figure was a part of the scene. It was a surreal and horrifying experience, as the boundaries between reality and fiction blurred. As the scene unfolded, the woman's whispers grew louder, and it was clear that she was trying to communicate something. The actors reacted with genuine fear, their performances driven by the very real terror that hung in the air. And then, it happened. In the final moments of the scene, the ghostly woman reached out and touched one of the actors. The actor's expression contorted in agony, and he screamed in pain as he collapsed to the ground. Chaos erupted on set as the crew rushed to the actor's side. He was unconscious, and it was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. The director, now pale and terrified, ordered everyone to stop filming, and the crew frantically called for an ambulance. As the actor was rushed to the hospital, I couldn't help but wonder if the curse of the mansion had claimed its first victim. The line between fiction and reality had blurred, and the horror we had been trying to capture on film had become all too real. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been witness to something beyond my understanding. The curse of the mansion was real, and it had taken a dark and terrible turn. The ghosts of the past were not content to remain in the shadows. They were determined to make their presence known. And here's the plot twist, my friend. After that fateful night, the movie was never completed. The director and crew were too shaken to continue, and the footage we had was considered too disturbing to release. The mansion was abandoned, left to the spirits that dwelled within. But the curse of that movie set didn't end there. In the following months, the crew members who had been on set that night began to disappear one by one. It was as if the ghostly woman had taken her revenge, claiming those who had invaded her home. I was the last one left, haunted by the memories of that night and the knowledge that I was next. The mansion called to me, its cursed walls whispering my name. I couldn't escape the feeling that the ghostly woman was watching, waiting for me to return. And return I did. One moonless night, I found myself drawn back to the mansion, unable to resist its siren call. As I stepped through the rotting door, the past and present blurred, and I became a part of the curse that had haunted that movie set. So, my friend, the next time you watch a horror movie, remember that the line between fiction and reality can be thin. Sometimes, the horror is not just on the screen. It can be all too real, lurking in the shadows and waiting to claim those who dare to enter its domain. Alright, let me take you on a little journey, one that still gives me the creeps when I think about it. It all started when I got a job as a production assistant on a low-budget horror movie. The set was an old, run-down mansion, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The mansion was a character in its own right, the perfect backdrop for a spooky movie. It had that classic haunted house look, creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and antique furniture that had seen better days. I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine the moment I stepped inside. From the beginning, there was something strange about the place, a weird vibe that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was like the air was heavy with the memories of the past, and the house itself was watching our every move. At first, it was the little things that unsettled me, props that seemed to move on their own, lights flickering without explanation, and strange, unexplained noises that sent shivers down your spine. I brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves from being on a horror movie set. The crew was tight-knit, but even they couldn't deny that there was something off about the mansion. Whispers about strange occurrences became a constant background hum, and I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. One evening, I was assigned the task of locking up the set after a long day of shooting. The crew had already left, and I was alone in that eerie old mansion. The silence was oppressive, and I could hear the faint rustling of the wind outside. As I locked the front door, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft, mournful wail, like a distant cry of agony. The sound seemed to come from deep within the house. I was terrified, but curiosity got the best of me, and I had to find out where it was coming from. I ventured further into the mansion, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The wail grew louder, more desperate, and it led me to a locked door in the basement. It was old and heavy, but I managed to pry it open. What I saw in that dimly lit basement will haunt me forever. There, in the corner, was a ghostly figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her eyes filled with sorrow and torment. She whispered something, her voice a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled back in terror, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that the mansion was truly haunted, and the ghostly woman was proof of the curse that had plagued the production. I tried to tell the crew, but they dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences on set only escalated. The prop department would set up a scene, only to come back and find everything rearranged. Lights would flicker on and off, and eerie voices could be heard when no one else was around. As we continued to film, things took a terrifying turn. One night, as we were shooting a pivotal scene, the ghostly woman I had seen in the basement appeared on set. She stood there, her eyes filled with anguish, and her presence sent a wave of dread through the cast and crew. The director, a no-nonsense type, ordered the cameras to keep rolling and the actors to play along, convinced it was a prank. But as the scene unfolded, the ghostly woman's whispers grew louder and more desperate. It was as if she was trying to communicate something that had been buried for centuries. And then, the unimaginable happened. In the final moments of the scene, the ghostly woman reached out and touched one of the actors. He let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Chaos erupted on set as the crew rushed to his aid, but it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The actor was rushed to the hospital, and the crew couldn't explain what had happened. The director decided to shut down production until they could figure out what went wrong. But here's where it gets even stranger. As we began to investigate, we uncovered old records that revealed a dark secret. The mansion had a history of tragedy and death, including a fire that had claimed the lives of the previous occupants. It turned out that the crew wasn't alone on that set. The spirits of those who had died in the mansion were still lingering, and they weren't too happy about our intrusion. The ghostly woman was just one of many who had met a tragic end in that house. The truth was finally sinking in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the curse of the mansion had claimed its first victim on our film. It was a chilling realization, and we couldn't continue to film knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows. We decided to leave the mansion behind, but it wasn't done with us. The spirits had become a part of our crew, and they weren't about to let us go so easily. Months later, after we had abandoned the film, the crew members who had worked on that cursed set began to disappear one by one. It was as if the spirits had exacted their revenge, taking those who had invaded their home. I was the last one left, haunted by the memories of that fateful night. The mansion called to me, its cursed walls whispering my name. I couldn't escape the feeling that the ghostly woman was watching, waiting for me to return. And return I did. One moonless night, I found myself drawn back to the mansion, unable to resist its siren call. As I stepped through the rotting door, I realized that I had become a part of the curse that had haunted that movie set. The crew members I had once worked alongside were now revealed as ghostly apparitions, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. They reached out to me, their eyes filled with sorrow and regret. I was now one of them, a part of the haunted movie set, destined to relive the horrors of that fateful production for all eternity. So, my friend, the next time you watch a horror movie, remember that the line between fiction and reality can be thin. Sometimes, the horror is not just on the screen. It can become a part of your life, lurking in the shadows and waiting to claim those who dare to enter its domain. Picture this. I found myself working as a production assistant on a movie set for a horror film. It was an old, slightly dilapidated mansion that had been chosen as the ideal backdrop for our spine-chilling masterpiece. The set looked convincingly haunted with its creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and antique furniture. The eerie atmosphere wasn't just a facade, it genuinely had an unsettling vibe. Maybe it was the way the shadows danced on the walls, or the echo of your footsteps that lingered in the air long after you'd taken a step. but that's what you'd expect on a haunted movie set, right? It's all part of the show, or so I thought. At first, it was the little things that gave me the heebie-jeebies. Props that mysteriously moved from their designated spots, strange sounds in the middle of the night, and lights flickering on and off at the most inopportune moments. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and horror movie ambience. But as the days went by, I couldn't deny that something strange was going on. It was like the set itself was alive, with a dark and mischievous personality. The crew would hush when you entered a room, and I could swear I heard whispers when no one else was around. One evening, I had the dubious honor of locking up the set. The rest of the crew had already left, and I was alone in the eerie mansion. The silence was oppressive, and every sound seemed amplified in that stillness. As I locked the front door and began making my way to the exit, I heard a soft, ghostly sobbing. It sent a shiver down my spine and raised the hairs on the back of my neck. The crying seemed to be coming from somewhere within the house. My gut told me to leave, but my curiosity got the best of me. I ventured deeper into the mansion, following the sound. The sobbing grew louder, more heart-wrenching, and led me to a locked door in the basement. The door was old and heavy, but I managed to force it open. And there, in the dimly lit basement, I saw her, a woman, ghostly pale and draped in a tattered white dress. Her tearful eyes met mine, and the sobbing seemed to turn into words, though I couldn't quite make them out. I was paralyzed, unable to move, and her presence filled the air with a heavy sadness. I stumbled back, retreating from the basement, heart pounding in my chest. I had seen a ghost. There was no doubt about it. But when I tried to tell the director and crew about it, they brushed it off as my imagination running wild. No one wanted to believe we were working on an actual haunted set, even though the signs were undeniable. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences on set continued to escalate. Objects moved, lights flickered, and eerie voices were heard. The crew grew more on edge, and it was clear that our unsettling surroundings were taking their toll. One night, as we filmed the pivotal scene, the ghostly woman I'd seen in the basement appeared on set. The director, thinking it was a prank, ordered the cameras to keep rolling and the actors to play along. It was a bizarre and terrifying experience, as the actors' reactions turned from scripted horror to genuine fear. As the scene reached its climax, the ghostly woman's presence became more intense. It was as though she was trying to communicate something, to tell her story, and it sent chills down my spine. The crew watched in horrified fascination, unable to look away. But here's where the story takes a twist. As the scene concluded, the ghostly woman reached out and touched one of the actors. He let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Chaos erupted on set as the crew rushed to his side, and we realized this was no ordinary haunting. The actor was rushed to the hospital, and it was clear that something inexplicable had occurred. The director decided to shut down production, not knowing if what we'd captured on film was a curse or something far worse. In the weeks that followed, we delved into the history of the mansion. What we discovered was that it had a dark and tragic past, but not because of ghosts. The house had been built on unstable ground, and its foundation was slowly sinking into the swampy land. It turned out that the strange occurrences on set were due to the mansion's deteriorating structural integrity. The creaking floors, shifting walls, and odd sounds were all the result of the house's own slow collapse. The actor who had been injured had merely tripped over a loose floorboard, but the fear and superstition had magnified it into something more sinister. The director and crew felt a collective sense of relief, knowing that we had been working in a physically unsafe environment rather than a haunted one. With the truth finally uncovered, the set was deemed unsafe for production and the movie was shelved. It was a bittersweet ending, but at least we could move on from our haunted set with a sigh of relief. So, my friend, When it comes to ghostly tales and horror movie sets, sometimes the truth can be even stranger than fiction. We may have thought we were dealing with restless spirits, but in the end, it was the very ground beneath our feet that held the most frightening secrets.